Tonight we stand on the edge of England in the year 1066, where the wind moves low over the southern coast, and the old kingdom seems to hold its breath. You are not watching a legend begin, you are watching a system collapse. In the soil near Hastings, archaeologists have searched for the physical trace of the battle for generations, while historians at Oxford and Yale have continued to examine the chronicles, charters, and royal records that shaped the memory of that year. The Bayeux Tapestry, preserved in France and studied by major museums, still offers one of the strangest visual records of the invasion. It is not a simple picture of victory. It is a long strip of accusation, fear, ambition, horses, ships, pointing fingers, and men who never return home. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the night settles in, tell me where you're watching from and what the local time is beside you. Somewhere, another listener is awake under a different moon, hearing the same old thunder roll toward England. You imagine the coast at dusk. Though imagination is almost too gentle a word. The sea smells of salt and rotting weed. The pebbles are slick beneath your feet. Gulls turn above the grey water, their cries thin and distant, as if even they are unsure what is coming. Across the Channel, in Normandy, thousands of men have gathered under one command. They bring horses, mail shirts, helmets, bows, lances, carpenters, priests, servants, and a hunger sharpened by promise. England waits, not peacefully, of course. Kingdoms rarely wait peacefully, but it waits with the heavy stillness of a house where everyone hears footsteps outside the door. In the halls of English power, men speak of claims, oaths, betrayals, and inheritance. They argue over who has the right to wear a crown that has become suddenly dangerous. The king is dead. The throne is occupied. The sea is no longer a border. It is a road. The mainstream record confirms the hard outline of the year. Edward the Confessor dies in January 1066, and Harold Godwinson is crowned king almost immediately. William, Duke of Normandy, insists that the crown was promised to him. The dispute becomes more than royal gossip. It becomes invasion. Research from Oxford historians has long emphasised how unusually centralised and wealthy Anglo-Saxon England already was, which made it a prize worth crossing the water to seize. That is the unsettling part. England is not conquered because it is weak. It is conquered because it is worth conquering. Its towns have coinage, markets, churches, sheriffs, estates, mills, and tax systems that can feed ambition like dry wood feeds flame. This is not some scattered land waiting for order. It is a functioning kingdom, old in custom and rich in resources. Its destruction will not look like a storm passing over empty fields. It will look like hands closing around a living throat. For a moment, it feels as though you're standing beside a road inland from the coast. The evening air is damp, the grass brushes your ankles. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once, then falls silent. A cartwheel creaks in the distance. In a small settlement, a woman pulls a child indoors. A man checks the latch of a rough wooden gate, though he knows very well that wood will not stop armoured riders. Still, people always check the latch. There is a strange comfort in useless gestures. You straighten the blanket, you count the grain, you watch the sky. You tell yourself that kings fight kings, and ordinary people remain ordinary. Then history arrives on horseback and proves otherwise. The Norman Conquest is often presented as a clean turning point, almost tidy in schoolbook memory. One king falls, another king rises, castles appear, French words enter English, and the country changes forever. It sounds orderly when arranged in neat lines. Yet the closer you move toward the year itself, the more the edges darken. The Conquest is not only a battle, it is the remaking of land, law, language, faith, and memory. It reaches into kitchens, barns, courts, monasteries, and burial grounds. It touches the name a child learns to answer to. It decides who owns the field, who pays the fine, who commands the road, and who is remembered as noble. There is also the old, quirky tidbit that follows 1066 like a moth around a candle. Some later traditions claim that Harold survived the battle, escaping with terrible wounds to live quietly as a hermit. Serious historians treat this with great caution, and most accept that he died at Hastings. Yet the rumour matters because it shows how conquest bruises imagination. People do not always accept the death of a world. They hide it in caves, chapels, and stories where the fallen king still breathes. Perhaps that is why 1066 remains so powerful. It is a date, yes, but it is also a wound dressed as a date. You can speak it in one breath, and still not exhaust what it did. It altered who ruled, who prayed in high office, who spoke in courts, and who possessed the written proof of ownership. It transformed England from a northern kingdom with deep ties to Scandinavia into a realm bound tightly to continental Europe. It pulled the island into the politics of France, papal authority, knightly culture, and dynastic war. And yet there is an open scholarly debate here, quiet but persistent. Some historians, including scholars shaped by Cambridge and Oxford traditions, argue that the conquest violently replaced England's ruling class and redirected the entire kingdom. Others suggest that many administrative structures survived beneath Norman rule, meaning the conquerors seized an existing machine rather than building one from nothing. The question is not whether England changed, it is how deeply the knife went. You may picture William as a man of iron certainty, but history is rarely so simple. He is not a shadowy monster from a fireside tale. He is a ruler shaped by danger, born into contested power, hardened by rebellion, and trained to see mercy as something that must serve authority. That does not soften what follows. It only makes it more human, and therefore more disturbing. The men who change history are not always mad. Sometimes they are patient, practical, devout, calculating, and absolutely convinced. Those are dangerous qualities. Across the water, the invasion fleet waits for wind. Ships sit crowded together, their hulls dark against the tide. Horses stamp and toss their heads. Men sleep badly beneath cloaks. Priests bless standards and speak of divine favour. A comet has already burned across the sky that year, recorded by observers and later embroidered into the Bayeux tapestry. To medieval minds, such a thing is not just astronomy. It is a warning. A blade of light appears above the world, and everyone decides it means something. Modern astronomy identifies it as Halley's Comet. Medieval England sees an omen. You can almost understand them. When the world is about to change, people search the sky for permission to be afraid. They look upward because the ground beneath them has become unreliable. They whisper that the heavens know what men will do. They wonder whether God has already chosen a side. And in 1066, with kings dead, armies moving, and ships waiting in harbour, the comet must have seemed like a bright wound above the night. The dark truth of the Norman conquest begins there, not with one swing of a sword, but with the slow gathering of forces that make ordinary life fragile. A throne becomes disputed. An oath becomes a weapon. A sea becomes a road. A duke becomes a claimant. A king becomes a target. A country becomes a prize. You stand beside that road as darkness thickens over the fields. The air cools. Smoke from a hearth drifts low and blue. Somewhere, someone is baking bread without knowing that soldiers will soon measure the worth of the village. Somewhere, a monk sharpens a quill and prepares to write events he can barely comprehend. Somewhere, a lord touches the hilt of his sword and tells himself that courage will be enough. It will not be enough. Yet the story must move slowly, because conquest does not only happen when armies clash, it happens first in the mind. It happens when one man believes another man's inheritance can be taken. It happens when written promises become stronger than local memory, It happens when ships are built, names are listed, horses are loaded, and priests persuade warriors that violence may enter the world wearing the clothing of justice. The coast darkens, the tide turns, and in that turning England begins to drift toward a future it does not yet recognise. Your mind drifts inland, away from the coast and into the older England that still exists beneath the gathering fear. It is late Anglo-Saxon England, not a dark and shapeless place, not a mud-soaked blank waiting for civilization. Despite what conquering stories sometimes prefer, it is a kingdom of our laws, coins, churches, markets, royal offices, and carefully measured obligations. It has its harshness, certainly. Every age does. But it is not primitive. It is organised, wealthy, and watched over by customs that have settled like dust upon oak beams. You walk through a village before dawn, while the grass is wet and the smoke has not yet risen from every roof. The air smells of damp straw, ash, animal warmth, and the sour comfort of ale left in wooden tubs. A rooster calls from behind a fence. Somewhere, a handmill turns with a low grinding sound, steady as breathing. The people here do not think of themselves as living in a fragile world. They think of rent, harvest, weather, births, marriages, fines, and feast days. History is still far away. That is always the illusion, is it not? People imagine catastrophe as something with clear edges, something announced by trumpets. Yet most lives continue normally until the moment they cannot. A child chases a hen across the yard, a woman shakes flour from her sleeve, a man carries a repaired ploughshare past the door, muttering about rain. They belong to a society with ranks and burdens, but also with rhythms that make sense to those born inside them. Records confirm that Anglo-Saxon England possessed one of the most sophisticated systems of royal administration in Western Europe. Scholars at Oxford and Cambridge have often emphasised the strength of its shire courts, royal writs, taxation, and coinage. Silver pennies issued under royal authority circulated widely, and their regular redesigns show a crown capable of reaching deep into local economies. That sounds dry on the surface. Yet in human terms, it means the king is not merely a distant symbol. He is present in the coin in your hand. You hold that coin in your palm, if only in imagination. It is small, silver, and slightly uneven, stamped with authority. Perhaps a king's face appears on it, formal and remote. Perhaps you cannot read the letters, but you understand power well enough. Coins travel where royal bodies cannot. They move through markets, rents, gifts, and wages. They remind everyone that the kingdom is more than land. It is a pattern of trust, command, and habit. The roads carry more than carts. They carry news, orders, taxes, rumours, and fear. A reeve may arrive with demands. A priest may bring instruction. A lord may summon men for military service. The system is not gentle, but it is familiar. That matters. Familiar burdens can feel almost natural, even when they press heavily on the shoulders. The village knows who owes labour, who holds land, who judges disputes, and who must stand in the assembly when summoned. Listen closely, and the kingdom has a sound. Hooves on packed earth, bells from a church tower, axes biting into timber, the murmur of men gathered in the local court, the rustle of parchment in a royal household far beyond the village. Even silence carries structure here. Fields are divided by memory, custom, and boundary marks. A stream, a stone, an ancient tree, a ridge in the soil. Each may hold meaning. Ownership lives partly in documents, but also in mouths. People remember. They remember who married whom. They remember whose grandfather cleared the field. They remember who failed to repair the bridge. They remember insults spoken 10 winters ago, because rural communities are efficient machines for preserving irritation. Some things never change, apparently. Even in the 11th century, your neighbour can still be an entire weather system. A quirky old tidbit survives around Anglo-Saxon royal life and food culture. Some elite households loved imported luxuries, including spices, fine cloth, and wine, when such goods could be obtained through trade and gift exchange. It is tempting to imagine a grey, plain England, all porridge and mud. Yet high-status tables could display surprising variety. The wealthy might enjoy foods and objects that had travelled across seas and through many hands. Even before conquest, England is not sealed away, it is connected. That connection reaches north as well as south. Scandinavian influence remains strong in many regions, especially where earlier Viking settlement reshaped law, language, and local identity. Place names preserve old movements of people. Customs differ from district to district. The kingdom may be unified under a king, but beneath that crown lie many textures. Some communities look toward the North Sea with inherited familiarity. Others lean toward older English traditions. Some families carry memories of Danish rulers not as invaders from story, but as part of living ancestry. This makes the kingdom more interesting and more vulnerable. Unity is real, but it is not simple. The crown binds together regions with different pasts. Powerful noble families hold enormous influence. Earls command loyalty across great territories. Monasteries keep records, prayers, books, and property. Bishops stand near kings. Queens may act as patrons, negotiators, and memory keepers. Women of noble families can hold estates, issue gifts, and shape alliances. Although always within constraints set by a male-dominated world, the society is layered, not flat. Your fingers brush a church door, rough beneath the skin. Inside, the air is cold, faintly scented with wax smoke and damp stone. Each priest speaks in a rhythm many villagers know by sound more than meaning. Images, relics, bells, and feast days knit sacred time into ordinary labour. The church is not a separate part of life. It is the calendar, the witness, the moral warning, the comfort at the grave, and sometimes the largest landholder anyone knows. A mainstream historical fact stands firmly here. By 1066, England's church was wealthy and deeply integrated into royal government. Major monasteries such as Canterbury, Winchester, and Westminster connected piety with politics. Research associated with institutions like Yale and the University of York has shown how religious houses preserved charters and land records that now reveal the administrative depth of the kingdom. The monks are not merely praying in dim rooms. They are helping the kingdom remember itself. That memory has weight. Charters define gifts of land. Witness lists reveal networks of power. Law codes express royal ideals, even when reality misbehaves in the usual human fashion. The written word does not float above society. It settles into disputes, privileges, taxes, and inheritance. A monastery may remember a grant long after a family forgets the terms. A royal command can travel farther than a warrior's voice. Ink becomes a kind of authority. Yet scholars still debate how stable this kingdom truly was beneath its polished administrative surface. Some historians argue that late Anglo-Saxon England was exceptionally strong, perhaps strong enough to have continued developing without invasion. Others point to rival earls, succession uncertainty, regional loyalties, and external threats as signs of strain. The open question remains delicate. Was England a sturdy house, struck by a violent hammer, or was it already creaking in the beams? Perhaps both. You move through a market town as the morning grows brighter. Stalls open. Bread cools on boards. Fish lie silver and dull-eyed on wet cloth. Wool is weighed. A moneyer's work may be discussed by men who know the value of a clean strike on silver. A merchant argues over measures, because apparently civilization has always included someone complaining about measurements. Beyond the humour, the market shows something essential. This is a country worth ruling because it can be counted. The crown can demand geld, a land tax with roots in earlier crises. It can summon ships and soldiers. It can issue commands through shires and hundreds. It can punish, reward, and collect. No ruler from across the sea would miss the meaning of such machinery. A conqueror does not only desire fields and halls, he desires systems already trained to obey. That is the darker elegance of the moment. England's strength becomes part of its danger. As dusk returns over this older world, you notice how peaceful it can seem from a distance. Smoke rises in thin threads. Cattle shift behind fences. A child sleeps against a mother's shoulder while a lamp burns low. The kingdom feels ancient, rooted, almost permanent. Yet permanence is often only a name people give to habits that have lasted longer than they have. The wooden latch closes, the silver coin cools, the old England breathes in the dark, rich with law, prayer, memory, and grain, not knowing how closely power is already studying its shape. For a moment, the channel lies before you like a dark sheet of beaten metal, cold beneath the fading sky. On the far shore, Normandy gathers itself into purpose. The land there is not merely waiting, it is preparing. Along river mouths and sheltered harbours, timber is cut, shaped, dragged, and joined. Men who usually build for trade or fishing now build for war. The sound is not heroic at first, it is practical. Axes bite, mallets strike, ropes creak. Wet wood smells sharp in the evening air. William, Duke of Normandy, stands at the centre of this tightening circle. He is not yet called conqueror by the world. He is a duke with a claim, a grievance, and an opportunity. His childhood has been brutal enough to teach him suspicion early. Noble families in Normandy have challenged him. Castles have resisted him. Men who smiled in court could plot behind doors. He has survived a dangerous youth, and survival leaves marks. Some men become gentle after fear. Others become very organised. William becomes organised. The mainstream record confirms that William's claim rested on a combination of alleged promise, political calculation, and sacred theatre. Norman sources insisted that Edward the Confessor had promised him the English crown, and that Harold Godwinson had sworn to support that claim. Historians connected with Oxford and the University of Caen have examined how Norman writers framed this oath as a moral injury, making invasion appear less like ambition and more like correction. That is rather convenient, of course. Conquerors do enjoy arriving with paperwork. You see the usefulness immediately. A man who wants a kingdom must do more than want it. He must persuade others that his desire has the shape of justice. Knights must be convinced to risk death. Lords must be promised reward. Priests must be asked to bless the undertaking. Shipwrights must be paid. Horses must be transported across water, which is a problem horses did not personally vote for. A claim becomes a machine only when many people agree to pull its ropes. The oath story matters because medieval politics loves memory when memory serves power. Harold may have sworn something in Normandy, perhaps under pressure, perhaps during an accident of diplomacy, perhaps in a way later writers sharpened into betrayal. The famous visual record shows Harold touching holy objects, making the act appear solemn and binding. Yet what exactly happened remains debated. Some scholars argue that the oath was central to Norman propaganda. Others suggest it may reflect a real event, later polished until it shone like a sword in candlelight. There is the open scholarly tension. Was William defending a legitimate promise? Or was he transforming a murky political episode into divine permission for conquest? The answer hides in sources written by men who had reasons to persuade. Yale medievalists and British historians have often warned that chronicles are not clean windows. They are windows with fingerprints all over the glass. Still, the preparations are real. You walk among the Norman camps in your imagination, where the air is thick with smoke, sweat, damp leather, and animal breath. Fires glow low in pits. Armour is repaired by hand. Mail shirts are checked ring by ring. A man tests the balance of a spear, then lowers it quietly. Another whispers to a brother he may never see again, nearby. A priest murmurs over men whose thoughts are probably less holy than he would prefer. War gathers all kinds of people, including the frightened, the greedy, the devout, and the bored. That mixture makes it human. Normandy itself is a restless place in the 11th century. Its rulers descend from Scandinavian settlers who had become French-speaking Christian dukes, which is one of history's neat reminders that identity can change its clothes without losing its appetite. The Normans are famous for adaptability. They fight in France, Italy, Sicily, and the Eastern Mediterranean. They build castles, make alliances, marry strategically, and turn opportunity into territory. They are not numerous enough to dominate by numbers alone. They dominate through movement, discipline, and nerve. William understands that England requires more than a raid. Vikings had raided, armies had crossed, kings had fought. But this undertaking aims at permanent seizure. He needs ships not just for warriors, but for horses, equipment, food, and the strange portable confidence of an invading elite. He also needs timing. The channel is narrow on a map, but water is never only distance. It is weather, tide, wind, fear, delay, and nausea. Many grand ambitions have ended with men leaning over the side of a boat, reconsidering their life choices. A quirky tidbit clings to the invasion fleet. Later tradition claimed that William's flagship was named the Mora, supposedly given by his wife, Matilda. The story is wrapped in romance and uncertainty, but it gives the fleet a strangely intimate detail. Amid thousands of men and animals, one vessel gains a name, almost a personality. You can picture it riding the water in the dark, lanterns shivering, its sail marked for recognition, carrying not only a duke but a future that will be forced onto another shore. The papacy also matters in this gathering. Norman accounts present the invasion as carrying religious approval, including a papal banner. Historians continue to discuss the nature and force of that approval, but the message was powerful. William could present his campaign as not simply personal ambition, but a righteous action against oath-breaking and church disorder. Whether every fighter cared deeply about canon law is another matter. Some likely cared more about land. Conveniently, heaven and real estate often travelled together in medieval politics. You hear the priests speak softly near the harbour. Their words drift through tar smoke and salt wind. Men bow their heads. Some pray sincerely. Some pray because everyone else is watching. Some probably ask forgiveness in advance, which is efficient if not exactly comforting. The sacred and the brutal stand close together. That is one of the unsettling truths of the age. Violence rarely arrives announcing itself as evil. It arrives wearing banners, prayers, claims, family rights, and legal arguments. William's genius lies in making many motives serve one road. For younger sons and ambitious knights, England promises land. For Norman nobles, it offers influence. For churchmen, it can be described as reform. For the Duke, it offers a crown and a legacy larger than Normandy. Each man sees his own future in the same ships. That is how great historical movements often form. Not everyone wants the same thing, but they all walk in the same direction long enough to change the world. The harbours grow crowded. Horses dislike the unstable planks beneath them. Sailors shout. Barrels are rolled. Shields are stacked. The smell of pitch settles into everything, clinging to hair and cloth. At night, the camp does not sleep deeply. Someone coughs. Someone laughs too loudly. Someone sharpens a blade long after it is sharp enough. Men look across water they cannot see and imagine England as a place of fields, halls, women, silver, and names they do not yet know how to pronounce. Across that water, the English crown is no longer an idea. It is a destination. You may feel the darkness of the moment not in rage, but in patience. The invasion is slow to launch. Winds delay the crossing. Supplies strain. Men wait with growing unease. Waiting can be worse than marching, because the mind supplies its own enemies. In that suspended time, William must hold together ambition, hunger, fear, and expectation. A lesser leader might lose control before the first sail rose. William waits, watches, threatens, promises, and endures. The sea keeps its own counsel. At last, the wind turns. The same invisible force that fills a child's kite now carries an armed society toward another kingdom. Sailcloth tightens, ropes pull hard, hulls shift against the water, horses stamp in terror, men grip rails and mutter prayers. The coast of Normandy begins to fall away behind them, lamps fading like embers in a hearth. The channel opens, England waits beyond the dark water, and William moves toward it with a claim in his mouth, a blessing over his banner, and conquest hidden inside the word justice. In your ears, the echo changes into marching feet, not from the southern coast, but from the hard roads of the north. Harold Godwinson is moving with a speed that feels almost impossible, as if England itself has become a body and he is its racing pulse. The air is colder there. The ground lies damp beneath the boots of tired men. Shields rub against shoulders, leather straps cut into skin. Breath shows pale in the morning, then vanishes. Harold is king, but kingship in this hour is not a jewelled seat. It is motion. He has already faced one invasion. Harold Hardrada of Norway, a warrior king with an old northern claim, has landed with ships and men near York. With him comes Tostig, Harold Godwinson's own brother, bitter, exiled, and dangerous. Family politics are charming like that, especially when they arrive with foreign armies. The northern threat is not a distraction. It is mortal. If Harold ignores it, England may split open from the top downward, so he marches north. Records confirm that Harold moves from the south of England to Yorkshire with remarkable speed in September 1066. The battle at Stamford Bridge follows on the 25th of that month, and English forces win a major victory. Scholars at Oxford and Nottingham have often treated this campaign as evidence of the strength of the Anglo-Saxon military system, especially the ability to summon and move forces quickly. It is a brilliant achievement. It is also exhausting. You walk beside those men in the imagination, and brilliance smells mostly of sweat. The road is uneven. Mud grips the soles. Pack animals stumble. A man adjusts the rim of his helmet and blinks grit from his eyes. Another carries a spear across his shoulder, trying not to think about his blistered feet. The army is made of obligations as much as courage. Great men ride with retinues. Local levies answer summons. Housecarls, trained warriors bound to their lord, form the hard iron centre of royal strength. Around them are others who may be brave, frightened, loyal, reluctant, or simply unlucky enough to be useful. The march itself becomes a kind of battle. There is no arrow storm yet, no clash of shield on shield, but bodies are already being spent. Sleep thins, food matters, tempers shorten. Men joke because silence becomes too heavy. Someone complains about the cold. Someone else complains about the complaining. The tomb is history, not the polished statue, but the sore ankle beneath it. Stamford Bridge appears in the mind as a place of sudden violence and sharp water. The Norwegians, according to later accounts, are caught off guard. Some may have left the armour behind in the warmth of the day, though details depend on sources that enjoy dramatic contrast. Harold's attack is swift. The fighting is brutal. Hardrada falls. Tostig falls. The invaders are broken so badly that later tradition says only a small number of ships are needed to carry survivors home. That tidbit is famous, grim, and slightly slippery. The often repeated figure claims that roughly 300 ships came, while only 24 returned. Historians treat such numbers with care because medieval writers like symbolic force. Yet the image remains powerful. A great fleet arrives like a forest on the water, and a remnant leaves like driftwood. It tells you what victory costs, not only to the defeated, but to those who must keep marching after they have won. Because Harold cannot rest. This is the cruel turn. He wins in the north, and almost immediately the southern danger becomes real. William has crossed the Channel and landed in Sussex. The king who has just crushed one invasion must face another, far away, with tired men and a kingdom still trembling. There is something almost tragic in the timing, as if fate has developed a taste for efficiency. A horse snorts beside the road. A messenger arrives. Mud to the knees, voice raw from urgency. News travels through the English force like cold water poured down the back. The Normans are in the south. The coast has been breached. Farms are threatened. The claimant waits. Harold must decide whether to pause, gather strength, call more men, and move carefully, or hurry south before the invaders deepen their hold. He chooses speed. Some historians admire the decision as bold and necessary. Others wonder whether caution might have changed everything. Researchers from Cambridge and academic military historians have debated whether Harold rushed too quickly toward confrontation, or whether political pressure made delay impossible. The open question has no simple answer. A king who waits may look weak. A king who hurries may arrive tired. Leadership, regrettably, is often the art of choosing which mistake will be least fatal. You can feel the pressure around him. Harold has not inherited calm. He has inherited a kingdom in crisis, with rival claims, recent coronation, strained loyalties, and enemies on different horizons. His authority must be demonstrated, not merely announced. If William ravages Sussex unchallenged, local confidence may weaken. Nobles may hesitate. The image of kingship may crack. Medieval rule depends not only on legal right, but on visible force. A king must be seen defending his land, especially when smoke rises from English fields. So the southern march begins. The roads lengthen beneath the men. The season turns. Leaves hang dull and tired on branches. Rain gathers in ruts. Campfires glow at night, small and smoky. Men sleep with cloaks pulled tight, muscles twitching from strain. Some have fought the Norwegians and now must face Normans. Others join along the route, bringing fresh bodies but not always equal training. The army becomes a moving mixture of veterans, reinforcements, household warriors, and men drawn by duty into a future none of them can read. Harold himself becomes difficult to see clearly through the mist of later writing. Norman sources have reasons to darken him. English memory has reasons to mourn him. He may be brave, capable, ambitious, oathbreaker, rightful king, usurper, defender, doomed man. History enjoys making one person carry many masks. Yet in this moment, on the road south, all masks narrow into one fact. He must meet William. The sensory world closes around that fact. Hooves strike wet earth. A raven lifts from a field. Smoke from burned or abandoned holdings may darken the Norman path in Sussex, as invaders use devastation to provoke response. The smell of trampled grass mixes with the iron tang of weapons. In villages along the way, people stare as armed men pass. Some cheer, some only watch. They know that armies defend, but they also eat. Even friendly soldiers can empty a barn with impressive enthusiasm. There is a quiet darkness in the English victory at Stamford Bridge, because it may have helped create the exhaustion at Hastings. Triumph becomes a burden. Courage becomes a debt. The same speed that saves the north may weaken the south. That is the uncomfortable shape of the year. Harold does something extraordinary. There must do something extraordinary again, with less time, less rest, and less mercy from circumstance. Your mind follows him into the southern dusk. The road seems endless now. The king rides beneath a sky the colour of old pewter. His men carry their shields, axes, spears, and private fears. Somewhere ahead, William is waiting. Somewhere ahead, the old English military order will meet Norman cavalry, archers, and a duke whose patience has finally reached land. The night settles over the moving host. No one can yet know that the march itself has become part of the battle, that every mile has taken something, that every hurried step has helped bring England closer to the hill, where a crown will be decided by exhaustion, discipline, rumour, and blood. For a moment, It feels as though the whole island has narrowed to one ridge of rising ground. The hill waits beneath a pale October sky, damp with the breath of autumn and the pressure of approaching men. Grass bends in the wind. The soil is firm in places, slick in others. From the crest, you can look down toward the Norman lines and see movement, colour, metal, horses, banners, and the restless shifting of an army preparing to climb. Harold's men stand above them. They have chosen height, and height matters. The English line forms along the ridge, shield pressed to shield, shoulder braced against shoulder. At the centre stand the housecarls, heavy with axes, their bodies trained for the brutal patience of close fighting. Around them are other men of varied experience, some hardened, some weary, some perhaps wondering why kings could not settle such matters with a quiet argument indoors. Sadly, history has always had poor meeting discipline. The air smells of churned grass, leather, sweat, and metal warmed by human hands. Somewhere a horse screams before the battle even begins. Men check straps, fingers tighten around spear shafts. A priest may have prayed, a warrior may have whispered a name, another man may have said nothing at all because fear sometimes takes language away and leaves only breath. Then the Normans advance. Mainstream accounts confirm that the Battle of Hastings took place on the 14th of October 1066, near the later site of Battle Abbey. Historians at Oxford, Cambridge, and other major institutions describe it as a long and unusually hard-fought engagement, not a quick collapse. The English shield wall held for hours against archers, infantry, and cavalry. That simple fact matters. England did not fall because its defenders lacked courage. It fell because courage met pressure that returned again and again. You hear the first arrows before you understand them. A faint hiss cuts through the air, followed by the dull slap of shafts striking shields. Earth and flesh. The English shields lift. Some arrows glance away. Others find gaps. The line tightens. The men on the ridge do not need to chase glory. Their task is to remain. Remaining sounds easy until hundreds of armed men and horses are trying to persuade you otherwise. Norman infantry climbs first in some reconstructions, pushing uphill through danger. The slope steals strength from the legs. The English throw missiles, thrust spears, and hold their wall. When the cavalry comes, the ground trembles differently. Horses climb with snorting mouths and rolling eyes. Riders lower lances. The English axes wait. A horse does not enjoy running into a wall of shields, and one suspects the horse's opinion was not fully consulted. The first assaults fail. Panic flickers through part of the Norman army. Rumour spreads that William has fallen. Rumour is fast, foolish, and very fit. It sprints through battle faster than any messenger. If the Duke is dead, the invasion may break. Men begin to falter. Then William lifts his helmet or reveals his face, depending on the account, showing that he lives. The gesture becomes one of the famous moments of the day. A leader must sometimes do nothing more complicated than prove he is not yet a corpse. That is leadership, grimly simplified. A quirky detail from the Bayeux tapestry shows Bishop Odo, William's half-brother, carrying a club rather than a sword. Later viewers often suggest this allowed a churchman to avoid shedding blood directly, which sounds morally tidy until you remember that being struck with a club is not exactly pastoral care. Scholars debate the meaning of the image, but it remains unforgettable. In one figure, the battle reveals its strange fusion of religion, family power, and sanctioned violence. The shield wall continues to hold. You stand inside it in imagination, and the world becomes narrow. You see the back of one shield, the side of another, the rim of a helmet, the muddy boot of the man beside you. Sound arrives in pieces, a shout, a crack, a horse falling, a man calling for water, the heavy chop of an axe, the wet gasp of someone who has discovered that history is not abstract when it enters the ribs. Keep your place. That is the law of the wall. If one man breaks, the next is exposed. If a few step forward too far, the line thins. If anger pulls men downhill, discipline loosens. The English strength depends on unity, and unity depends on restraint. Yet restraint is difficult when enemies seem to retreat. It is difficult when blood is hot. Friends have fallen, and victory appears to be running away. Here the famous debate enters. Many accounts describe the Normans using feigned retreats, drawing portions of the English line downhill before turning on them. Some historians accept that these tactics played a crucial role. Others question whether every retreat was planned, suggesting that real panic may have been later transformed into clever strategy by victorious writers. Military scholars continue to weigh the possibility. Was Norman discipline so controlled, or did chaos accidentally become opportunity? The answer changes the feeling of the day. Planned deception makes William terrifyingly composed. Accidental recovery makes the battle more unstable, more human, and perhaps even more disturbing. In either case, the effect is deadly. English fighters leave the ridge. Norman cavalry turns. Men who are strung together become vulnerable in fragments. The hill begins to bleed away its defenders. Still, Harold's centre holds. The royal standard remains. The English king stands among his men, not far away in safety, but inside the storm that will decide him. Norman sources later emphasize divine judgment. English memory leans toward tragedy. The Bayeux tapestry shows a figure often identified as Harold near an arrow and a falling warrior, though scholars still debate whether the image truly shows an arrow in his eye or another method of death. The familiar story may be partly woven from later interpretation, yet Harold dies. That fact stands like a cold stone in the hand. However the final wound is given, the king falls, and with him the living centre of English resistance collapses. A battlefield can endure many deaths, but the death of a king changes the weather inside men. The shield wall loses not only command, but meaning. Some continue fighting, some flee, some are cut down. Evening moves over the field with terrible calm. The mainstream historical record supports the result clearly. William wins the battle, and Harold's brothers are also killed. The leading family of the English kingdom suffers catastrophic loss in a single day. This is not only military defeat, it is political decapitation, a society built around personal bonds, noble houses, oaths, and royal authority suddenly lacks the men who might have rallied it most effectively. You look across the ridge as darkness deepens. The field is no longer a strategy. It is bodies, broken equipment, loose arrows, riderless horses, and groans fading into the cold. Men search for lords, brothers, sons, and friends. Others strip the dead with the practical cruelty that often follows battle. The smell changes as night comes. Blood, trampled soil, fear, and opened bodies settle into the air. Even the victorious must sleep somewhere near what they have made. The hill keeps everything. It keeps the broken shields. It keeps the hoof marks. It keeps the last warmth of men who had names, jokes, debts, and favourite places at home. It keeps the silence after shouting. Later, Abbey Stone will rise near this memory, and chroniclers will shape the day into moral lessons. But the hill itself needs no lesson. It has absorbed the end of a kingdom. The battle does not feel like a clean door closing. It feels like a hinge tearing loose. The old order has not yet vanished everywhere, but its centre has cracked. William has won a field, not a nation, yet the field gives him the right to demand more. The road to London remains. The towns, churches, shires, estates, and courts remain. The people remain. That is the darker truth. Conquest is not finished when a king falls. It is only given permission to continue. Night covers the ridge. The wind moves softly over the grass, as if nothing has happened. But beneath that calm, England has tilted. The hill has chosen no one. It has only received them. And somewhere among the dead, the last breath of Anglo-Saxon kingship leaves the cold October air. The road to London does not open like a welcome gate. It tightens, resists, and bends beneath the weight of uncertainty. William has won the field, but a battlefield is not a kingdom. The crown still waits beyond walls, rivers, councils, frightened towns, and men who must decide whether survival is wiser than defiance. You can feel the strange pause after victory, that hollow space where everyone realizes the killing has not answered everything. The air grows colder as the season moves toward winter. Across southern England, news travels in broken pieces. Harold is dead. His brothers are dead. The Normans have won. No, perhaps the English will rally. No, perhaps London will resist. No, perhaps the bishops will decide. Rumour walks faster than armies, slipping into marketplaces and monastic halls, entering kitchens before the soldiers arrive. It carries fear in one hand and invention in the other. People believe what they can bear, then change their minds by supper. William does not simply ride to the throne and sit down. He advances with calculation, and calculation can be more frightening than rage. Towns are threatened. Lands are burned. Routes are tested. The conqueror must make resistance feel expensive before obedience can seem reasonable. He circles toward London rather than relying on one direct thrust, pressuring the kingdom's remaining leaders until their choices narrow. This is not the bright moment of a crown descending. It is a slow tightening around a throat. Records confirm that after Hastings, English leaders briefly considered Edgar, a young member of the old royal line, as king. Yet he lacked the military power and adult authority needed in the crisis. Historians at Cambridge and Oxford have long noted that William's victory at Hastings became decisive partly because the English aristocratic leadership had been shattered. A crown can be inherited by blood, but it must still be defended by men with swords, land, and nerve. London waits behind its defences. You stand near the city in imagination as winter breathes along the river. The Thames moves darkly under a pale sky, carrying reflections of timber, smoke, and worry. The city smells of wet wood, fish, dung, cooking fires, tallow, and human crowding. Bells sound from churches. Merchants hide valuables. Mothers keep children near doorways. Men gather in tense conversation, speaking low because fear makes every wall feel thin. London is not a modern capital, but it is already powerful. It holds wealth, population, and symbolic force. Whoever is accepted there gains more than shelter. He gains the appearance of England bending. William knows this. The remaining English leaders know it too. Bishops, nobles, and citizens must judge whether continued resistance will preserve the kingdom or invite deeper ruin. It is a terrible calculation, made with ashes already in the air. The surrender does not feel noble. It feels cold. At Berkhamsted, according to later accounts, leading English figures submit to William. They give hostages and acknowledge him. Hostages are one of those medieval practices that reveal politics without decoration. Trust is fragile, so people hand over living bodies as guarantees. A son, a nephew, a noble child. A person with a name and a pulse becomes security for obedience. Imagine being comforted by relatives saying it is an honour. How soothing, how entirely awful. A quirky detail clings to William's coronation in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066, when the assembled crowd shouted approval inside the church. Norman guards outside reportedly mistook the noise for rebellion and set fire to nearby houses. Whether every detail is perfectly preserved remains uncertain, but the story captures the nervous violence of the moment. Even celebration sounds dangerous when conquerors are listening, in a language they do not fully understand. Inside the abbey, sacred ceremony tries to tame the raw fact of seizure. You enter the space in your mind, and the world changes. The air is colder than expected. Stone holds the winter chill. Wax smoke lifts slowly. Clergy move with practiced solemnity. Latin prayers shape the room into order. Golden cloth gleam under dim light. Somewhere nearby, men who survive the road stand armed. watching faces as carefully as relics. The ceremony says continuity. The soldiers say interruption. William is crowned King of England. That sentence is simple. The reality is not. The coronation attempts to transform conquest into legitimacy, violence into divine approval, and a duke into an anointed ruler. Medieval kingship needs ritual because power must be seen as more than force. Oil, prayer, oath, crown, and altar make a claim upon the imagination. The man who had come with ships now stands beneath sacred words, and the kingdom is asked to believe that heaven has recognized the outcome. An open scholarly debate continues around the coronation's meaning. Some historians see it as William's effort to present himself as lawful successor to Edward the Confessor, not merely Harold's destroyer. Others argue that the ceremony could not hide the brutal novelty of foreign rule imposed by arms. Scholars from Yale and London have described this tension as central to understanding Norman kingship. Was the crown a bridge to older legitimacy, or a mask laid over conquest? Perhaps it was both. That is where the darkness deepens. William does not want to look like an invader forever. Invaders are resisted. Kings are obeyed. He must occupy the old sacred spaces, honour certain forms, preserve useful offices, and speak through the structures England already understands. At the same time, he must reward the men who crossed the sea for him. They did not come for a pleasant winter holiday. They came for land, rank, and advantage. A king who disappoints armed followers soon learns the acoustics of rebellion. So ceremony and confiscation begin to walk together. You can almost hear two sounds at once. In the abbey, chant rises beneath stone arches. Beyond it, flames crackle in frightened streets. The symbolism is almost too neat, which is probably why it remains so memorable. Sacred order inside, panic outside, a crown placed upon the head, house is burning in the cold. England's future appears in that contrast. Calm words surrounded by coercion. William takes vows to rule justly, as kings are expected to do. Such vows matter, even when rulers bend them until they creak. They establish ideals by which later anger can measure betrayal. The king promises justice and protection. The conquered hear those promises while counting the cost of refusal. There is a grim intimacy in that moment. Power speaks gently when it has soldiers at the door. The city must adjust to the new presence. Norman men move through English streets, hearing a language many do not understand. English townspeople watch them pass, measuring armour, horses, faces, and manners. Every glance contains a question. Are these men temporary? Are they masters? Will they take houses? Will they respect churches? Will they pay for bread? It is remarkable how quickly grand political change becomes a question of bread. Winter folds around the new reign. Snow or frost may touch fields beyond the city. Smoke thickens over roofs. The river carries its dark water eastward. Messengers ride outward with commands. Royal authority begins to spread from the ceremony like ink dropped into water, yet the ink is not evenly absorbed. Many regions remain uncertain. Resistance has not vanished. Local loyalties survive. The old nobility is wounded, not entirely gone. William has the crown, but the crown is now a promise of further struggle. A mainstream fact remains essential here. William was crowned in Westminster Abbey, the church recently associated with Edward the Confessor, who had died earlier that same year. That choice linked the new ruler to the old king's sacred prestige. Archaeological and historical studies of Westminster have emphasised how royal ritual there helped shape English kingship for centuries. In 1066, the site becomes more than a building. It becomes a stage where memory is captured. You stand near the abbey doors as evening gathers. The smell of smoke lingers. The shouts have faded. Somewhere a family searches through the remains of a burned house. Somewhere a Norman knight laughs too loudly with relief. Somewhere an English cleric wonders how to write this day without angering the men who now hold power. The crown has been placed. The realm has not been healed. That is the dark truth of ceremony. It can sanctify without soothing. It can declare peace while fear remains awake in every street. It can make a conqueror kneel before an altar, then rise as king. The bells sound into the winter air. Their echoes move over London's roofs, across the river, and into the listening dark. To some, they announce lawful rule. To others, they toll for a lost world. And beneath both meanings, something colder settles into England. The understanding that Conquest has learned how to speak in the voice of holiness. The first thing you notice is not the height of the castle, but the speed of it. Earth is cut, lifted, piled, and shaped with an urgency that feels almost unnatural. Men drag baskets of soil across torn ground. Timber beams are hauled into place. Ditches open around towns like fresh scars. A mound rises where no mound stood before, and on its crown a wooden tower begins to look down upon everything. The landscape learns a new posture. You stand near the edge of a settlement as Norman workers and forced local labourers reshape the earth. The air smells of wet clay, sweat, split oak, and smoke from hurried fires. Someone curses under his breath while carrying another load. Someone else watches from a doorway, saying nothing, because silence has become a safer language. Children stare at the rising structure with open mouths. They do not yet have the words for military occupation. They only know the skyline has changed. Castles are not simply buildings. They are warnings made visible. Records confirm that the Normans introduced castle building across England on a scale the country had not previously known. Earlier fortified places existed, especially towns and earthworks, but the Norman motte and bailey castles spread rapidly as a tool of control. Archaeologists at universities such as Oxford, Exeter and York have studied these early sites, showing how they were often placed in towns, near roads, beside rivers, and close to important estates. Location was never accidental. Power likes a good view. The motte is the mound. The bailey is the enclosed yard. The tower rises above them like a raised fist. It may be timber at first, because timber is fast, and conquerors are rarely known for patience when they feel exposed. Stone can come later. First comes dominance. First comes the ability to watch, shelter soldiers, store supplies, and remind everyone below that the new ruler has not merely arrived. He has settled. Your fingers touch the rough side of a timber palisade. Splinters catch the skin. The wood still smells alive, recently cut and forced into military service. Inside the enclosure, horses shift, armour hangs, bread is baked, arrows are stacked, and men from Normandy, Brittany, Flanders, and beyond speak in unfamiliar accents. Their camp has become architecture. Their temporary violence has grown walls. The town below must adapt. A castle changes movement. Roads are watched. Markets become easier to control. Hostages can be held. Taxes can be collected with firmer confidence. A rebellion can be answered from a protected centre. The old public spaces of Anglo-Saxon rule, where courts and assemblies carried local authority, now find themselves overshadowed by private fortresses linked to foreign lords. The message is clear enough even without translation. Your life may continue, but it continues under observation. That is an intimate kind of conquest. It enters through the eyes. Every morning, a villager wakes and sees the tower. Every evening, the silhouette remains against the sinking sky. Even when no soldier speaks, the castle speaks. It says that the land has a new grammar. It says that violence has acquired an address. It says that resistance will not meet a passing army, but a rooted machine. A quirky detail survives in the shape of some early castles. Several were built directly inside or against existing towns, sometimes requiring houses to be cleared or urban spaces to be rearranged. Imagine discovering that your neighbourhood has been selected for strategic improvement. Medieval planning consultation was let us say, not famous for community feedback. In places such as Lincoln, Norwich, and York, castles altered the fabric of urban life, pressing military architecture into places where ordinary people already lived, traded, prayed, and complained about prices. The discomfort is easy to miss when castles become picturesque ruins. Modern visitors wander grassy mounds and broken walls, perhaps carrying sandwiches and mild enthusiasm. The stones seem romantic in sunset, yet the original message was not romance, it was control. A castle was a tool for surviving among a resentful population while extracting obedience from it. It was security for the conqueror and insecurity for everyone beneath its walls. There is an open scholarly debate around how quickly and uniformly castles transformed England. Some historians emphasise their immediate military purpose during the first unstable years. Others argue that castles also became administrative centres, symbols of lordship, and engines of social reorganisation over a longer period. Researchers from Cambridge and the University of Reading have explored how these sites evolved from emergency strongholds into permanent seats of aristocratic power. The question is not whether they mattered. It is how many kinds of power they held at once. The answer seems to be many. You walk through the Bailey as dusk gathers. A blacksmith works near a low shelter, sparks rising like brief orange insects. A cook stirs a pot that smells of onions, grease, and smoke. A guard leans against a post, bored in the ancient and universal manner of guards everywhere. His boredom is part of the system. He does not need to strike anyone today. His presence is enough. Beyond the ditch, English villagers pass with carts, eyes lowered or narrowed. Some bring supplies because they are ordered to. Some come for work because power always creates unwanted dependence. Some may even find opportunity, selling goods to garrisons or serving new lords. Conquest is rarely one single feeling. It produces hatred, fear, accommodation, advantage, and tired practicality in the same street. The castle also changes sound. The older landscape had bells, animals, mills, tools, and voices. Now it gains shouted commands from walls, hoofbeats from armed patrols, hammering from construction, and the heavy thud of gates. At night, the tower creaks in the wind. Watchmen murmur above the sleeping town. Dogs bark at unfamiliar movements. Somewhere, a prisoner coughs in darkness, and no one outside can help him. This is power with height. The Normans understand vertical authority. Their towers rise above halls, markets, and churches. They create a new visual order in which the armed lord literally looks down upon the people whose labour sustains him. That visual fact becomes social fact. Over time, children born in the shadow of these works may accept them as part of the world, as permanent as hills or rivers. That is how conquest ages into normal life. It teaches the next generation that the wound is architecture. Yet the first generation remembers the field before the mound. They remember where a house stood. They remember the lane before soldiers widened it. They remember the orchard cut for timber. They remember the burial place disturbed. Perhaps not always, but often enough to make the point. Local memory rubs painfully against imposed design. The new lord may hold the charter, but the old woman by the hearth still knows what was taken. A mainstream fact rests beneath this change. By the end of William's reign, England contained a dense network of castles and fortified sites associated with Norman lordship. The exact number varies by definition and survival, but the transformation was unmistakable. Archaeological surveys across England reveal how rapidly the conquerors embedded themselves in the physical landscape. They did not only defeat an army, they changed what people saw when they looked homeward. The evening grows colder around the mound, smoke lifts from the town, but the castle catches the last light. Its tower darkens against a violet sky. From below, it seems both temporary and eternal, wooden and yet immovable, new and already oppressive. The men inside laugh, sleep, eat, quarrel, sharpen blades, and write themselves into possession. The people outside learn routes, silences, prices, and risks. The road is watched, the gate is barred, and across England, one raised mound after another begins to teach the conquered that the future will not merely rule them from afar, it will stand above them, built from their own earth, looking down. The land itself becomes the next battlefield. Though no trumpet announces it, you feel it in the slow opening of chests, the unrolling of charters, the naming of fields, the measuring of woodland, meadow, mill, and stream. A sword may win a kingdom in one day, but ownership must be taken again and again, in ink, in oath, in judgment, in fear, and in the quiet acceptance of neighbours who know the new lord's men are armed. You stand at the edge of an estate where frost silvering the grass makes everything look briefly innocent. Smoke rises from a manor hall. The yard smells of wet earth, horse dung, and stored grain. A steward steps outside with a tablet or parchment, his face tight with importance. Beside him waits a man whose language sounds foreign to many local ears. He does not know every boundary. He does not need to. Others will be made to tell him. This is where conquest enters the soil. Records confirm that the Norman conquest caused one of the most dramatic transfers of landholding in English history. Within a generation, most great English aristocratic families lost their estates, while William's followers received vast rewards. Historians at Oxford, Cambridge, and Yale have often described this as a near-total replacement of the upper landholding class. The old elite did not simply lose battles. They lost the legal memory of belonging. Imagine a noble household before the change. The hall is smoky and loud, with benches along the walls, dogs underfoot, shields above, and servants moving through warm lamplight. A lord's authority rests not only on wealth, but on ancestry, gift-giving, marriage alliances, witness lists, feasts, and stories repeated until they feel like landscape. People know who belongs where. They know whose father gave the church a meadow. They know whose mother brought a cluster of estates through marriage. They know which family has sat in the hall longer than anyone alive. Then a new name appears. The old lord is dead, exiled, dispossessed, imprisoned, or reduced. His widow may plead. His sons may vanish into service, rebellion, or obscurity. His daughters may become bargaining pieces in marriages that knit English inheritance to Norman power. His dependents must adjust quickly, because hunger is not sentimental. The hall still needs firewood. The plough still needs oxen. Rent still comes due. Only the hand receiving it has changed. That is one of the conquest's coldest accomplishments. It turns personal loss into administration. A quirky tidbit sits inside the grimness. Some English landholders survived by entering agreements with Norman patrons, hiding portions of property through religious gifts, or attaching themselves to church institutions. People have always been remarkably creative when faced with losing everything. Medieval survival could involve marriage, bribery, holy donations, careful silence, or suddenly remembering that a cousin's cousin had rights that were very useful. Thank you. Not everyone vanished. Some bent, blended, or burrowed into the new order, yet the scale of dispossession remains staggering. You walk through a manor as the new lord's men arrive. They inspect the barns. They count animals. They examine the mill, because mills are money with water running through them. They ask about plough teams, tenants, slaves, woodland for pigs, meadow for hay, and fisheries. Every useful thing gains sharper definition. The stream is no longer merely where children splash and women rinse cloth. It is revenue. The oak wood is not only shade and acorns, it is value. The village is not only home, it is income. The villagers understand quickly. They may not care which noble bloodline claims the manor in a distant genealogical sense. Ordinary people are often practical about aristocratic drama, especially when aristocrats make such a banquet of it. But they care deeply about demands. Does the new lord raise dues? Does he respect custom? Does he take more labour? Does he punish more harshly? Does he bring men who seize chickens without asking, which is apparently a timeless military tradition? Landholding is never only elite politics, it shapes daily pressure. A woman carrying water hears that the estate has changed hands. Her first thought may not be constitutional transformation. It may be whether her family will still have access to pasture. A villain worries about labour services. A free tenant wonders whether his status will be recognised. A miller wonders whether the fee will change. A priest wonders whether the church's rights will be confirmed or challenged. A widow wonders whether anyone will protect the little that remains to her. The debate among scholars turns on continuity and rupture. Some historians argue that the Norman land transfer was revolutionary, replacing English lordship with a militarised aristocracy tied directly to William. Others note that many local practices, boundaries, and peasant obligations continued under new masters, at least at ground level. Researchers associated with London and Durham have explored this tension through estate records and later legal evidence. Was society uprooted from top to bottom, or was the upper branch cut away while the roots endured? Perhaps the answer depends on where you stand. From the height of aristocracy, it is catastrophe. From the village furrow, it may be catastrophe mixed with continuity, which is somehow worse in its own quiet way. The plough still goes forward. The child still cries. The bread still bakes. The rent still comes due. The world ends, and breakfast remains necessary. History has a cruel talent for combining apocalypse with chores. You place your hand against a boundary stone in the cold. It has seen many seasons. Rain has darkened it. Moss gathers in its cracks. It marks a limit that people remember by walking it, naming it, arguing over it, and dragging reluctant witnesses to it when disputes arise. Under the new regime, such boundaries may remain, but their meaning is redirected upward. The field that once supported one lord's household now supports another man's reward for conquest. The soil does not move. The rights above it do. That difference changes memory. A dispossessed family may continue to speak of land as theirs long after parchment says otherwise. Stories become a form of resistance. A grandmother tells a child that the meadow once belonged to their blood. A monk records a benefactor whose descendants no longer prosper. A servant remembers the old hall before foreign speech filled it. Memory cannot reverse confiscation, but it can refuse to bless it. The conquerors know this, perhaps instinctively. That is why documents matter so much. They do not merely describe power, they help create it. A grant written, witnessed, sealed, and preserved can outlive a protest spoken beside a hearth. Norman rule relies on the Old English habit of documentation while redirecting its benefits. The machine remains useful, so the new rulers seize the levers. It is efficient in a way that feels almost insulting. A mainstream fact stands firm here. By the time of the Great Royal Survey later in William's reign, only a tiny fraction of major land remained in English hands, compared with the enormous holdings granted to Norman and Allied followers. This was not incidental reward scattered after war. It was a structural transformation of lordship. The men who crossed the sea became the men who held the country. Even names begin to settle over the land differently. Norman families attach themselves to estates, castles, and honours. English names linger among tenants, monks, craftsmen, and local witnesses, but high political space changes accent. The social ceiling lowers over the conquered. To rise now often means serving the new elite, marrying into their networks, adopting their customs, or waiting through generations until memory becomes genealogy, and genealogy becomes respectable again. The manor yard darkens. A candle appears in the hall window. Somewhere inside. The new lord eats from the produce of fields he did not inherit from ancestors buried nearby. Outside, a local man pauses beside the granary and looks across the land with an expression no record will preserve. Perhaps he is angry, perhaps afraid, perhaps simply tired. Tiredness is one of history's most common emotions, though it rarely receives a proper chapter. The frost thickens on the grass. No army charges now. No shield wall stands. Yet the conquest continues more deeply than ever, through lists, grants, confiscations, marriages, and the slow replacement of remembered belonging with enforceable possession. The land remains, the owners change, and in that quiet exchange, England discovers that defeat can be written into every field without moving a single stone. Your mind moves north into a colder silence, where the air feels thinner and the fields seem to remember fire. The land does not greet you with battle noise at first. It greets you with absence, empty byres, roof beams blackened against pale sky, footpaths half hidden by neglect, a broken cart sunk into mud near a lane where no one has come to lift it. The north has become a place where hunger walks more steadily than men. This is not merely punishment. It is policy with ash on its hands. The rebellion in the north is fierce because northern England is not easily folded into obedience. Great distances, older loyalties, Scandinavian connections, powerful local families, and resentment of foreign rule all make the region dangerous to William. York becomes a focus of resistance. Danish forces appear. English rebels rise. Norman authority, still new and brittle, finds itself threatened in a region where roads lengthen, winter bites, and local memory does not bend politely on command. William answers with devastation. Records confirm that between 1069 and 1070, the king led campaigns across northern England that became known as the Harrying of the North. Chroniclers describe widespread destruction of villages, crops, livestock, tools, and food stores. Historians at Oxford and Durham have treated the episode as one of the most severe acts of royal violence in medieval English history. The scale remains debated, but the memory is unmistakably dark. You stand near a field that should be sleeping under winter, waiting for spring labour. Instead, it lies torn and useless. Grain stores have been emptied or burned. Oxen are gone, killed, stolen, or driven away. Without oxen, ploughs do not move. Without seed, fields do not recover. Without stored food, families do not simply feel discomfort. They begin to disappear. Medieval famine is not a dramatic monster. It is slow arithmetic inside the body. The smell is hard to escape. Wet ash clings to the ground. Smoke lingers in wool. Rot rises from places where animals fell and were not carried away. A cold wind moves through roofless houses, making a low sound in the gaps. Somewhere, a door swings on one hinge. It taps, pauses, taps again. The sound feels almost alive. Although life has retreated from this place with sensible urgency, people scatter into woods, marshes, and towns that may not feed them. A mother carries a child wrapped too tightly in cloth. An old man refuses to leave a hearth that no longer gives warmth. A boy searches the mud for spilled grain. A priest looks at the burned frame of his church and wonders whether the sacred vessels were hidden well enough. Someone has buried a small store of coins beneath a floor, because hope sometimes takes the form of hiding what cannot feed you. The darkness of the harrying lies in its target. It does not only kill fighters, it breaks the conditions that allow communities to live. Crops, animals, mills, barns, and tools are not glorious objects, but they are the bones of survival. Destroy them, and time itself becomes hostile. The next harvest fails before it is planted. The next winter begins before this one ends. A quirky and grim tidbit appears in later monastic writing, where the devastation is described so intensely that some accounts seem almost apocalyptic. Chroniclers speak of hunger driving people to desperate acts, and while such language may be shaped by moral horror, it reveals the psychological wound left behind. Medieval writers were not shy about dramatic phrasing. Bless their ink-stained nerves. But here exaggeration is difficult to separate from trauma. That uncertainty matters. The open scholarly debate around the harrying is not whether William used terrifying force. He did. The debate concerns scale, mortality, intention, and geography. Some scholars argue that the destruction amounted to near genocidal devastation across wide regions. Others caution that the evidence is uneven, and that later records may reflect both real ruin and the rhetorical habits of chroniclers. Researchers from Cambridge, York, and major archaeological projects continue to assess settlement patterns, land values, and documentary traces. The question remains painfully precise. How many lives vanished behind the language of devastation? No answer feels clean. You walk through a deserted settlement and notice small things. A spindle whorl near a threshold, a cracked pot by a wall, charred grain fused in a storage pit. These are not grand symbols. They are the furniture of ordinary existence. A woman once spun thread here. Someone once cooked something humble and complained about the smoke. A child may have hidden near the doorway during rain. The Conquest has reached them without needing to know their names. William's purpose is frighteningly rational. The North must not become a permanent base for rebellion. Danish intervention must be discouraged. Local resistance must be starved of food, shelter, and confidence. If the land cannot be trusted, the land will be ruined. In strategic terms, scorched earth can make sense. That is precisely why it chills the heart. Human cruelty often becomes most dangerous when it can explain itself. The king's men move across the countryside with practical efficiency. Barns are fired, livestock taken or slaughtered, tools broken. Men suspected of rebellion killed or driven off. Those who survive face hunger, disease, exposure, and displacement. A sword strike ends quickly. Destroyed food continues killing after the soldiers have gone. It is violence that lingers in the stomach, in the milk that does not come, in the seed that is not sown. The North answers with silence, not total silence, of course. Crows call from fences. Wind moves through reeds. A child coughs under a hedge. Somewhere, someone prays with the exhausted insistence of people who have run out of alternatives. Yet compared with the earlier life of markets, mills, herds, bells, and ploughs, the quiet feels unnatural. It is the quiet of a place pushed out of rhythm. A mainstream fact stands beneath the horror. The later Royal Survey records large areas of Yorkshire and neighbouring regions with reduced values, wasted holdings, or signs of severe disruption. Historians have used this evidence carefully, comparing it with chronicles and local studies. It does not provide a complete body count. It does show that the Conquest violence left measurable scars in land assessment and economic memory. You can almost see the scribes years later trying to turn ruin into entries. This manor was worth so much, now less. This land was held by one man, now another. This place is waste. The word is small, but it opens like a pit. Waste means no return, no rent, no plough, no village life functioning as expected. It means the kingdom's great account book has encountered absence and given it a label. The suffering also reshapes power. Surviving communities become easier to dominate when old networks are broken. Land can be redistributed, castles can be strengthened, loyal Norman lords can be planted in strategic regions, bishops and sheriffs can extend royal will. Resistance does not vanish forever, but it becomes harder to sustain when barns are empty and graves are fresh. This is the Conquest without ceremony. No golden crown, no embroidered banner, no careful speech about justice, only cold policy, carried into barns and fields. The language of legitimacy fades here, because hunger does not care who had the better claim. It knows only whether there is bread. The northern dusk gathers early. Snow begins lightly, covering ash with a whiteness that looks almost merciful from a distance. But distance is the trick. Up close, the blackened beams remain beneath it. The empty stalls remain. The buried dead remain. The people who fled may not return, and those who return may find that home has become a shape in memory rather than a shelter. You stand at the edge of the ruined field as evening closes. The wind presses through the grass with a dry whisper. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a Norman castle watches the road. Somewhere in the dark, a family shares the last of what they have and says nothing about tomorrow. And there, in the wintered north, England learns that conquest can do more than defeat a people. It can make the land itself afraid to bloom. The kingdom is quiet under parchment, not peaceful. Exactly. Quiet. The kind of quiet that settles when men with authority begin asking questions, and everyone understands that answers will become burdens. You enter England in the year 1086 when the sword has already done its loud work, and the ink is ready to do something colder. Roads carry royal commissioners, halls receive strangers, local men are summoned to speak under oath, memory is turned outward, examined, corrected, and trapped in writing. This is how power learns to count. You stand inside a shire court where the air is thick with damp wool, smoke, and unease. Men gather close, their faces shadowed beneath the roof beams. The floor smells of trampled rushes and wet boots. A clerk sits ready, his hand steady enough to make anxiety look tidy. Questions are asked in formal order. Who held this land in the time of King Edward? Who holds it now? How many hides? How many ploughs? How many villagers? How many cottagers? How many slaves? How much woodland? How many mills? Every answer narrows the world. Records confirm that William ordered the Great Survey of England in 1085, with results compiled in 1086 into what later became known as Domesday Book. Scholars at Oxford, Cambridge, and the National Archives have long treated it as one of the most extraordinary administrative records of medieval Europe. It does not cover every corner equally, and some northern areas appear damaged or difficult to value. Yet its ambition is startling. It tries to see the kingdom as property, obligation, and revenue. You may notice what kind of knowledge it wants. It does not ask whether a village is lonely. It does not ask which mother lost 2 sons. It does not ask where the old lord was buried, or whether the new one is hated, or whether children still flinch when horses pass. It asks value. It asks capacity. It asks who held, who holds, and what can be taken. The survey is not emotionless because men had no emotions. It is emotionless because the crown needs a different kind of truth. A cold truth. The commissioners rely on local juries, both English and Norman, because conquest still needs native memory. This is one of the stranger ironies of the age. The same people who have watched land change hands must help describe the change accurately. English testimony becomes the foundation of a Norman control. The conquered are required to remember themselves into the conqueror's book. There is a grim elegance in that. In one village, 12 men may swear what they know. They speak of fields, tenants, rights, and values before the conquest and now. Their words may settle disputes or create new ones. A name entered poorly can damage a family's claim. A boundary described one way rather than another can shift obligation. A mill forgotten, or perhaps not forgotten at all, can alter wealth. The clerk's hand moves, and memory becomes evidence. Evidence becomes taxation. Taxation becomes obedience wearing arithmetic as a cloak. A quirky tidbit clings to the book's later name. It was not originally called Domesday in the sense of a cheerful government filing project. The name came later because people compared its judgments to the final day of reckoning, when no appeal could be made. A little dramatic, perhaps, but not entirely unfair. When a royal record decides what you owe, where you stand, and who holds the land above you, it can feel rather final. The survey sees people through categories that flatten living complexity. Villagers, smallholders, freemen, slaves, priests, mills, plough teams, meadows, fisheries, woodland measured by how many pigs it can support. That last detail often surprises modern minds, but pigs are excellent medieval accounting units in their own earthy way. A woodland that feeds swine feeds households. A household that feeds itself pays dues. Even acorns become part of royal understanding. Nothing useful is too humble to be counted. You walk beyond the court into a landscape being translated into entries. A mill turns beside a stream, its wheel groaning with patient force. Water slides green and brown beneath it. Flour dust hangs inside the building, pale on hair and sleeves. The miller knows the value of motion. Grain enters. Meal leaves. Payment is taken. Somewhere in the royal record, this usefulness becomes a number. The wheel's creak becomes income in another man's mind. Nearby, fields lie in strips, shaped by years of labour. Oxen pull slowly, breath steaming in cool air. Their hooves sink into the soil. A boy walks beside them with a switch, bored and serious in equal measure. He does not know that his village is being summarised far away. He does not know that the number of plough teams can reveal both present wealth and lost potential. He knows mud, hunger, orders, and whether the oxen are behaving, which just frankly is enough for one morning. The open scholarly debate around Domesday concerns both purpose and meaning. Some historians argue that it was primarily designed for taxation and military assessment, helping William understand what his kingdom could provide. Others emphasise its role in resolving land disputes after massive confiscation, creating a written map of lordship. Researchers from Yale, Oxford, and the University of London have explored how the survey served many purposes at once. Was it a tax instrument, a legal weapon, a conquest ledger, or royal theatre? It was likely all of these. That is why it feels so powerful. Domesday does not merely record conquest after the fact. It completes part of conquest by stabilising it in writing. The old world had been disrupted by violence. The new world needed documentation. Once written, the new arrangements gained an authority harder to challenge. A sword can be resisted. A record preserved in royal custody can outlive everyone who witnessed its creation. The dark truth is that ink can conquer more permanently than iron. A lord who received land through royal favour now finds his position named. A tenant who once served an English master now appears under a Norman one. A village previously valued highly may be listed as reduced, damaged, or waste. The book is full of small transformations that, taken together, reveal a country rearranged. It is not a story told for comfort. It is a ledger of possession after shock. You can sense fear in the process, though the pages do not say fear. Men summoned to testify know that royal questions are not casual. Answers have consequences. Silence has consequences. Contradiction has consequences. The oath itself calls God as witness, which gives every statement a sacred pressure. To lie may endanger the soul. To tell the truth may anger a lord. Medieval life does enjoy offering people relaxing choices, does it not? The commissioners move on. They leave behind stirred memories and sharpened obligations. Villagers return to fields. Lords return to halls. Priests return to churches. Yet something has changed. The kingdom has been seen from above, not as a patchwork of human homes, but as a structured body of resources. The crown can now imagine England in a more complete way than any earlier ruler. It can compare, demand, judge, and plan. A mainstream fact remains central. Domesday Book records landholding both in the time of Edward the Confessor and under William, allowing historians to trace the enormous transfer of property after the conquest. Its pages show Norman tenants-in-chief holding vast estates, while many English names appear in reduced positions or not at all among the highest ranks. The survey is therefore not only administrative, it is historical memory under royal supervision. That phrase should trouble you. Memory under supervision is different from memory freely spoken. Domesday preserves details we would otherwise lose, and for that reason historians depend upon it. Yet it also reflects the priorities of the ruler who ordered it. It remembers what power wanted remembered. It forgets what power did not need. No entry tells you how a widow felt when her lord changed. No line records the smell of burned grain in a northern barn. No column holds the sound of an old language spoken softly under new authority. Still, the book endures. You imagine the pages, dark ink resting on pale skin, names and values arranged with severe patience. Each entry is small. Together they are immense. England has been divided into questions and answers. The Conquest has moved from field to court, from court to page, from page to royal command. The living kingdom has become legible to its master. Outside, evening lowers over a manor. The cattle return slowly. Smoke rises from huts. A woman pours water into a pot. A child scratches lines in the dirt with a stick, making a private map that no commissioner will ever ask to see. Somewhere in a hall, a new lord hears what his estate is worth. Somewhere in a monastery, a scribe copies a charter, hoping the wording will protect the house against greed. The survey's silence spreads through everything. No sword is drawn in this moment. No army marches. Yet England is being held firmly by another kind of force, one that measures before it commands and writes before it takes. The parchment waits, the quill descends, and beneath the soft scratch of ink, a conquered kingdom is taught to answer when counted. Language changes most quietly when power enters the room. You hear it first in a hall where a new lord sits beneath smoke-blackened rafters, listening to petitions through men who stand between tongues. The fire snaps low. Dogs sleep near the rushes. A servant carries bread across the floor, watching faces rather than words. Near the high seat, French sounds move smoothly from noble mouths, while English waits below, older, broader, and more rooted in the soil outside. No one announces that speech has become a staircase, yet everyone feels where they stand. The Conquest does not erase English. That would be too simple, and history rarely does simple work when it can manage something slower and more uncomfortable. English continues in villages, fields, workshops, kitchens, markets, and ordinary quarrels. It remains the language of mothers soothing children, labourers cursing broken tools, neighbours arguing over fences, and old men explaining weather with absolute confidence. A language can survive far from the throne, but survival is not equality. Records confirm that after 1066, Norman French became the language of the ruling elite in England, while Latin remained central to church, scholarship, and formal record-keeping. Historians at Oxford, Cambridge, and Stanford have often described this as a layered linguistic order. French gathered around aristocratic power, law, landholding, and courtly status. English remained living and widespread, but it lost much of its old written prestige for a time. You can sense the change at a manor court. A local tenant steps forward, cap in hand, rough wool, damp from morning mist. He understands the field, the rent, the boundary, and the old custom. But the man judging him may speak another tongue. A clerk may translate. A steward may reshape the complaint into terms acceptable to the new order. Meaning crosses the room, but not without losing warmth. Each translation is a narrow bridge, and not every person is invited to cross comfortably. The law itself begins to sound different. Words connected with courts, judgment, property, prison, estate, government, authority, and noble rank increasingly come through French or Latin channels. English does not disappear, but it absorbs, bends, and stores. Centuries later, common speech will carry traces of this old inequality. You may eat cow in the field, from an English root, but beef at the table, from French influence. The animal belongs to those who tend it. The prepared meat belongs to those who dine above. That tidy example is a little too tidy, of course. Real language change is messier than dinner vocabulary. Still, it captures something true enough to be useful. Conquest enters the mouth. It leaves marks in the difference between work and status, body and ceremony, hunger and cuisine. English becomes rich partly because it is wounded. It takes in the speech of rulers, clerks, priests, merchants, and courts, then turns those borrowed pieces into something that will one day travel far beyond the island. That is the strange afterlife of humiliation. You sit in the corner of a monastery scriptorium, where the air smells of scraped parchment, wax, and damp wool. A monk copies Latin with careful discipline. His fingers are stained. His back aches. Somewhere nearby. Another text preserves English words, perhaps in a homily, a medical charm, a land boundary, or a local note that refuses to vanish entirely. Latin reaches upward toward the universal church. French leans sideways toward aristocratic fashion. English stays close to the hearth. Stubborn as banked embers, a quirky tidbit survives in bilingual and mixed expressions from the centuries that follow, where speakers seem perfectly willing to shuffle languages together when useful. Medieval people were not walking dictionaries divided into neat boxes. They borrowed, misheard, adapted, and showed off. Someone with a little French could sound important. Someone with too much French could sound ridiculous. Social climbing has always had an accent. The hierarchy of speech also changes names. Norman personal names spread across England. William, Robert, Richard, Henry, Matilda, Alice, and many others gain elite prominence. Older English names do not vanish overnight, but they lose ground among the powerful. Names are intimate things. They are spoken over cradles, written into records, just carved into memory or agmund, and called across yards at dusk. When naming patterns change, conquest has entered the family. Imagine a child born into a household navigating this new world. His grandmother remembers older names with a tenderness sharpened by loss. His father serves a Norman lord and thinks a French name may help the boy. His mother worries less about symbolism and more about whether the child survives winter, which is reasonable. The infant receives a name that sounds like opportunity to one generation and surrender to another. That is how history settles into a cradle. The open scholarly debate here is subtle. Some linguists and historians argue that the Norman conquest caused a sharp break in English written culture and social vocabulary. Others emphasize long continuity in spoken English, especially outside elite settings, noting that the language remained the majority tongue throughout. Scholars from Yale and the University of Edinburgh have explored how English survived beneath official pressure, then re-emerged transformed. Was English crushed downward? Or did it retreat, gather strength, and return changed? Perhaps retreat is not always defeat. English becomes less visible in certain records, but visibility is not life. The language breathes wherever people do. It lives in lullabies, insults, bargains, warnings, prayers, and stories told beside a fire while rain taps on the roof. It carries the memory of older law and local custom, even when the written court favours other tongues. It is not prestigious in the same way, but it is persistent. Prestige can be fragile. Persistence is harder to kill. You hear three languages moving through one landscape. Latin rings from the altar and the charter. French moves through castles, noble households, and royal courts. English rises from lanes, barns, workshops, and ordinary grief. These languages do not float separately like clean banners. They rub against one another. They compete, mingle, and leave stains. A clerk may know Latin and French. A lord may learn enough English to command tenants. A peasant may learn enough French words to understand danger, rent, or insult. Misunderstanding becomes part of daily life. There is danger in not understanding. A command shouted from a horse may be missed. A legal term may be accepted without comprehension. A promise may be heard differently by each side. Language is not decoration. It is access to protection, power, and persuasion. When the ruling tongue changes, justice can become a room where ordinary people stand without keys, yet language also mocks power in the long run. The conqueror's French does not remain untouched. It changes in England. English does not remain pure, whatever that would even mean. And purity is usually a boring fantasy anyway. Over generations, the speech of the island thickens with borrowed words, softened sounds, altered grammar, and layered meanings. The final result is not Norman speech replacing English. It is English surviving by becoming capacious enough to contain the conqueror. That is not comfort exactly. It is endurance. A mainstream fact remains firm. The centuries after 1066 produced massive French influence on English vocabulary, especially in law, administration, aristocratic life, art, warfare, and cuisine. This linguistic transformation helped create the Middle English that later writers would use with astonishing range. The Conquest reshaped English not by silencing it completely, but by forcing it into contact with languages of domination. You step outside the hall as night settles. From the Lord's chamber comes French laughter, polished and quick. From the chapel comes Latin chant, rising like smoke into rafters. From the yard comes English speech, low and practical, asking whether the gate is barred, whether the child is warm, whether tomorrow's work begins before sunrise. None of these sounds is the whole kingdom. Together, they make the new kingdom's uneasy music. The wind moves through the thatch. A servant whispers a phrase learned from a soldier. A clerk searches for the right Latin form. A villager repeats a French word with suspicion, then uses it anyway because life gives little reward for linguistic pride. Slowly, almost invisibly, England's future vocabulary gathers in the dark. The tongue is divided. The tongue survives. And from the long pressure of rank, law, prayer, and labour, a changed English begins to form, carrying conquest inside its ordinary words. The churches begin to change their bones. You feel it first in stone, not doctrine. A wall grows thicker, an arch curves with a heavier confidence. A tower rises where an older church once stood lower against the sky. The scent of lime mortar mixes with wet earth, cut timber, wax smoke, and the human sweat of builders who carry faith upward one block at a time. England's sacred places are not merely repaired, they are remade. The transformation is visible from far away, across the countryside. Old minsters, wooden churches, and earlier stone buildings stand beside works of Norman ambition. Some are expanded, some are replaced, some are swallowed by larger plans, as if the new rulers cannot quite trust holiness unless it has wider walls and a more commanding silhouette. Sacred architecture becomes another language of conquest, quieter than the castle, but not always gentler. You enter a church at dawn, while mist clings to the graveyard grass. The door is cold beneath your hand. Inside, the air holds the smell of wax, damp stone, old wool, and breath. A priest moves near the altar. His voice is low. The light falls through narrow openings, pale and uncertain, touching carved capitals, columns, and new masonry that seems almost too massive for the village around it. Power has learned to pray in stone. Records confirm that the Norman period saw major rebuilding across English religious life, including great cathedrals at places such as Canterbury, Winchester, Durham, and Ely. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the Courtauld Institute have long studied this architectural shift as part of a wider reforming movement, tied to continental monastic ideals and episcopal authority. The churches did not change only in shape. Their leadership, customs, and political loyalties changed too. William and his successors replaced many English bishops and abbots with men from Normandy and the wider continent. This was not a minor personnel adjustment, rather like changing the candle supplier and hoping no one notices. Bishops were landholders, advisors, judges, patrons, and guardians of written memory. To control the church was to control one of the great engines of authority in the kingdom. The altar and the estate were not strangers. You sit in the shadow of a cathedral workshop and listen. Chisels tap rhythmically against stone. Ropes creak as blocks are lifted. A master mason gives instructions with calm irritation. Workers respond, some skilled, some exhausted, some probably wondering why holiness must be so very heavy. Dust settles on hair and sleeves. The building grows by effort, calculation, devotion, and command. A quirky tidbit clings to the bones of this sacred rebuilding. In several places, older Saints' shrines had to be moved, examined, or ceremonially translated into new settings. Such moments could be delicate. If the relic seemed to approve, the new church gained prestige. If something went wrong, people might whisper. Medieval communities took saints seriously, and frankly, so would you if your local identity depended on a box of bones behaving well. The handling of saints reveals the deeper unease. English religious memory was full of local holy figures, royal saints, miracle stories, and traditions rooted in particular places. Norman reformers often respected some of these cults, especially when useful. But they also judged English practices through continental eyes. Some older customs appeared suspicious, untidy, or insufficiently disciplined. Reform could mean renewal. It could also mean replacement wrapped in moral confidence. That is a familiar costume. The open scholarly debate concerns whether the Norman transformation of the church should be seen mainly as conquest, reform, or both. Some historians argue that Norman bishops brought real administrative discipline, continental learning, and stronger connections with Rome. Others stress that these changes displaced English clergy and weakened local religious traditions. Researchers from Cambridge and the University of York have explored this tension through charters, architecture, saints' lives, and monastic records. The question is not whether reform occurred. The question is who paid for its holiness. You walk through Canterbury in imagination, where sacred authority and political power press close together. The cathedral precinct is busy with clerics, servants, builders, petitioners, animals, and the constant movement of a great religious household. The air smells of incense inside, and mud outside, because spirituality rarely eliminates drainage problems. Men speak Latin in formal spaces. French moves among elites. English murmurs among labourers, pilgrims, and local people who know the streets by habit rather than decree. A new arch rises above an older memory. The building itself teaches obedience through scale. A small person enters a great stone space and feels the body grow quiet. Pillars lift the eye. Vaulting gathers sound. Chant moves through the air slowly, like smoke that has learned music. This is not accidental. Architecture shapes emotion. It can make authority feel ancient even when it has recently arrived. Norman bishops also reorganized dioceses, moved some episcopal seats from smaller settlements to larger towns, and strengthened ties between ecclesiastical and royal administration. The church becomes more clearly aligned with the new ruling order. It remains a spiritual institution, certainly, but it is also a political body with lands, courts, rights, and influence. A bishop may bless, judge, advise, negotiate, and command. Holiness has paperwork. In the graveyards, ordinary people feel change differently. They still bury their dead. They still seek prayers. They still bring offerings when fear presses hard against the chest. The dead lie beneath the grass regardless of who appoints the bishop. Yet even burial places can become part of transformation. A rebuilt church may disturb old graves. A new lord may sponsor a chapel. A monastery may receive lands once held by English families. Memory is rearranged around altars. You pause beside a tomb. The stone is cold. Names may be missing, worn, or never carved. Most people leave no grand monument. They leave bones, traces, and obligations carried by the living. When Norman patrons endow religious houses, they also secure prayers for their souls. That is piety. But it is also social conquest reaching beyond death. The new elite wants to be remembered in sacred spaces, sung for, buried near altars, and woven into the kingdom's spiritual memory. A mainstream fact stands clearly here. Lanfranc. an Italian scholar and monk who became Archbishop of Canterbury under William, played a central role in reshaping the English Church. His reform strengthened ecclesiastical discipline, clarified hierarchy, and linked Canterbury more firmly to continental currents. Historians at Oxford and major theological colleges have treated his tenure as one of the defining moments of post-conquest religious reorganisation. Yet the Old English Church was not simply a sleepy institution awaiting rescue. It had learning, saints, royal patronage, and deep local roots. That matters. Conquest often justifies itself by describing what came earlier as disorder. Sometimes there is truth in the criticism. Sometimes the criticism is merely a broom sweeping inconvenient memory into a corner. The candle flame flickers. A monk copies a manuscript with careful strokes. Perhaps he preserves an older English text even while serving a newly governed house. Perhaps he records gifts from Norman lords in Latin while remembering English benefactors now displaced. He may not see contradiction, or he may see it clearly and keep writing because manuscripts do not copy themselves, which is another small tyranny of civilization. The sacred world becomes layered. Old saints remain, but some shine less brightly. New patrons arrive. New buildings dominate skylines. New bishops hold councils. New rules circulate. The Church provides comfort to the conquered and legitimacy to the conquerors. It shelters memory while helping reorganize it. It prays over suffering while receiving land from those who caused it. That is not simple hypocrisy. It is the complicated machinery of medieval life, where salvation, ambition, fear, and administration often share the same bench. Even the bells sound changed. Their ringing crosses fields where castles stand. Estates have shifted, and languages divide the air. The bell calls people to prayer, but it also reminds them who owns the church, who appoints the priest, who names the bishop, and whose soul is commemorated in the best place near the altar. Faith remains sincere. Power remains nearby. The evening settles over a cathedral rising from scaffolds. Workers descend ladders. Tools are gathered. Dust hangs golden in the last light. Inside, a chant begins, slow and measured, filling unfinished stone with the promise of eternity. Outside, villagers pass beneath walls built partly by their labour, for rulers whose names will be carved more deeply than theirs. The church stands, the bones beneath it listen, and in this shadow of the new arches, England learns that conquest can kneel, pray, and still continue its work through sacred stone. You remain with the people whose names rarely climb into royal histories. The great men have banners, seals, charters, and tombs. The ordinary people have worn hands, bent backs, local memory, and the stubborn habit of waking again. They live beneath conquest rather than inside its speeches. They do not decide who claims the crown. They do not write the laws in elegant Latin. Yet the change settles most heavily upon them, because every command eventually becomes work for someone. Morning comes to a village under pale light. A woman rises before the sun and stirs embers from ash. The hearth breathes red again. Smoke gathers beneath the roof and slips through gaps in the thatch. The room smells of wool, damp straw, old smoke, and bread dough waiting near warmth. A child murmurs under a blanket. Outside, a rooster calls with the confidence of a creature completely unaware of political trauma. Life continues. That may be the saddest phrase in history. A conquest does not suspend hunger. Childbirth, winter, sickness, debt, or the need to mend a broken hinge. The people beneath Norman rule still cut hay, milk animals, brew ale, bake bread, gather firewood, repair fences, and carry water until shoulders ache. Yet the framework around these tasks has shifted. The Lord may be new, the demands may be harsher, the steward may speak through a translator, the castle may watch the road, the rent may be counted with sharper eyes. Records confirm that most people in late 11th century England lived in rural communities tied to estates, obligations, and local courts. Research from universities such as Oxford, York, and Cambridge has used manorial evidence, archaeology, and settlement studies to reconstruct this world of villagers, smallholders, slaves, clergy, craftsmen, and women whose work supported the entire social order. Their lives are not decorative background. They are the foundation beneath every crown. You walk beside a plough team moving slowly through heavy earth. Oxen lean into the yoke, their breath white in the cold. A boy guides them, his boots dark with mud. The soil turns in thick ribbons. Somewhere nearby, a man scatters seed with a rhythm learned from watching older hands. There is no drama in the movement, only endurance. The kingdom's wealth begins here, in mud, muscle, weather, and luck. Weather remains the ruler no conqueror can defeat. Rain at the wrong time can ruin grain. Frost can bite young shoots. A sick animal can collapse a household's hope. The new Norman lord may own the estate, but he cannot command the clouds, which must have been very irritating for men accustomed to obedience. Still, when harvest fails, pressure moves downward. Lords need income. Tenants owe labour. Families stretch food. Children learn the taste of thinness. Women carry much of this hidden world. They brew ale, manage dairies, spin thread, tend children, bake, garden, care for animals, help in fields, exchange goods, and preserve household memory. Some hold land in their own right, especially widows, though the room for action is shaped by rank and local custom. A noble woman may negotiate estates and marriages. A peasant woman may bargain at market and defend small rights fiercely. Neither is free in a modern sense, but neither is invisible if you know where to look. You hear the sound of a spindle turning. It is small, almost soothing. The wool twists into thread beneath practiced fingers. The movement repeats through evening, through conversation, through worry. A woman listens as men discuss the new steward's demands. She says little, perhaps, or perhaps she says exactly what everyone else should have noticed earlier. Households survive because someone remembers what is owed, what is hidden, what is stored, who is sick, who is useful, and which neighbour can be trusted only before noon. A quirky tidbit appears in the small economies of daily life. Ale was often brewed domestically, and women called alewives could sell it locally. Quality and measures could cause disputes, because medieval people were perfectly capable of being dramatic about bad ale. In a conquered village, such ordinary arguments continued. Someone still accused someone else of short measure. Civilization, apparently, can lose kings and still find time to complain about drink. Craftsmen also live within the change. A smith hears more requests for horseshoes, nails, fittings, hinges, and repairs tied to new lordly buildings. A carpenter may work on a hall, a bridge, a church roof, or even the hated timber of a fortification. A potter shapes clay for households that have no interest in high politics except when it empties their purses. A miller watches grain come and go, collecting a share while everyone suspects him of taking slightly too much, as tradition demands. The conquest creates new opportunities for some. That truth is uncomfortable, but necessary. A local man who learns French words may serve as intermediary. A clerk who writes well may find a patron. A merchant may profit from garrisons and noble households. A craftsman may gain work from construction. An English woman of property may marry into a Norman line, whether by choice, pressure, strategy, or some uneasy mixture. History is not fair enough to make suffering evenly distributed. Some suffer, some adapt. Some rise by standing near the new power and pretending not to notice the smoke behind it. The open, scholarly debate around ordinary people concerns how deeply daily life changed below the elite level. Some historians argue that peasants experience continuity in routines, fields, and local obligations despite new lords above them. Others stress that harsher lordship, castle labour, forest law, estate restructuring, and social insecurity transform the texture of everyday life. Scholars from Stanford, Oxford, and the University of Leeds have framed the question carefully. Did conquest mostly replace rulers? Or did it seep into the daily bread of the poor? The evidence points both ways. You can still hear English spoken at the hearth. You can still smell pottage simmering in a pot. You can still see children chasing each other beside a ditch, because children remain offensively committed to play even during historical upheaval. Yet the father may owe service to a new lord. The mother may fear soldiers near the road. The older brother may have been taken for castle labour. The priest may answer to a bishop whose reforms feel distant and strange. Continuity can hide pressure. A village court meets beneath familiar routines. But the authority behind judgment has shifted. A tenant walks the same boundary, but the claim above it belongs to another. A family attends the same church, but the patron has changed. These are not always visible revolutions. They are adjustments repeated until the soul grows tired. Ordinary people learn when to speak, when to bow, when to flatter, when to hide a pig, and when to become suddenly ignorant of useful information. Survival is a skill. At dusk, the village gathers into smoke and shadow. A man returns from woodland with a bundle of sticks. A girl carries eggs inside her sleeve. An old woman sits near the doorway, watching the road with eyes that have seen too much and recorded it without ink. The castle beyond the fields is dark against the sky. Its presence has become familiar, which does not mean forgiven. A mainstream fact remains plain. The conquest did not replace the English population. It placed a new elite over them. The vast majority of people continued to be English-speaking villagers, labourers, townspeople, and clergy whose lives formed the body of the kingdom. Major research in social and landscape history has shown that beneath high politics, local communities adapted through negotiation, endurance, and memory. That is where the deepest truth waits. England changed forever, not only because kings, bishops, and lords changed. It changed because ordinary people had to teach their children how to live under the change. They taught new cautions, new names, new obligations, new fears, and new routes around power. They preserved old songs where they could. They used new words when necessary. They kept working because the cow still needed milking and the roof still leaked. Night settles over the village. The fire lowers. The room grows warmer than the world outside. Someone tells a story in English, softly, while the child half sleeps. Perhaps the story has no king in it. Perhaps that is the mercy. Perhaps it is about a fox, a foolish priest, a clever wife, a lost cow, or a ghost near the stream. The conquered keep more than land records. They keep laughter, warnings, recipes, grudges, prayers, and the precise memory of who once owned what. The great histories move above them. Their lives continue underneath. And in that quiet endurance as beneath towers, courts, or churches and foreign names, England survives by becoming something wounded, watchful, and still alive. England after the Iron Reign is not silent. It is changed in the way an old house is changed when new beams are driven through its walls. The rooms remain, the hearth remains. The wind still finds the same cracks. Yet every familiar thing now carries another weight. Law, land, speech, worship, memory, and kingship have all been touched by conquest, and none returns to its former shape. You stand on a road in the late 11th century, while evening gathers over fields once ruled by older families. The mud is cold beneath your boots. A cart moves slowly ahead, its wheels groaning under sacks of grain. In the distance, a castle mound rises against the dimming sky, and beyond it a church tower holds the last light. England has not vanished. It has been overlaid. That is often how history works. It does not always erase the world beneath. It presses another world on top of it, until the two become difficult to separate. A king's officer rides past with documents. A reeve lowers his head. A monk copies a charter. A woman calls a child indoors. Somewhere, a lord speaks French at table. Somewhere else, an old man mutters English by the fire, remembering names no clerk bothers to write, records confirm that the Norman conquest permanently altered the structure of English monarchy. The crown became tied to continental lordship, military tenure, castle power, and a more sharply organised aristocracy. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and Cambridge have often described 1066 as a turning point that redirected England toward the politics of France and the wider Latin Christian world. The island remained an island, but its rulers now looked across the sea as naturally as inland. This shift did not merely change diplomacy, it changed ambition. English kings after the conquest held lands and interests on both sides of the Channel. The ruler of England might also be a great lord in France, which sounds impressive until you realise it creates centuries of exhausting family arguments with armies attached. The crown became richer in reach and poorer in simplicity. English politics could no longer be understood only by walking English roads. One had to watch Normandy, Anjou, Aquitaine, Paris, Rome, and every cousin with a claim and an inconvenient personality. The law also began to change its clothing. Older English customs endured in many places, but Norman royal authority sharpened procedures, land-holding obligations, and the relationship between lordship and service. Feudal language can be overused, and historians rightly handle it carefully. Still, the conquest tied land more clearly to military obligation among the elite. Men held from the king, men owed service, men received honour, office, and property from the victorious structure above them. You enter a royal court in imagination. The room smells of wax, damp cloaks, ink, and anxiety. Petitioners wait with guarded faces. A clerk prepares to write. A lord speaks with confidence because power sounds different when it expects to be obeyed. An English claimant may still seek justice, but justice now travels through new hands, new languages, and new assumptions. Law remains a promise. It is also a gate. A quirky tidbit survives in the later legal memory of conquest. For centuries, some people imagine 1066 as a great break that introduced every oppressive custom in one grim package. The phrase Norman yoke would appear much later, used by writers who blame the Normans for lost English freedoms. It was not a precise medieval description, but it reveals how conquest became a symbol. People kept returning to 1066 whenever they needed a story about liberty stolen by foreigners. History, apparently, is never too old to be recruited into a modern argument. Memory becomes one of the final territories. The victors write, build, endow, and name. They turn battlefields into abbeylands. They place their dead in sacred spaces. They marry their children into the future. They make their rule appear inevitable. Yet the conquered do not vanish from memory. They survive in language, local tradition, saints' cults, place names, legal habits, village routines, and stories whispered with careful pride. A people may lose high office and still remain the majority beneath the floorboards of power. The open scholarly debate remains alive. Some historians argue that the Norman conquest was the most decisive rupture in English history, remaking elite society almost completely. Others emphasize continuity in administration, local custom, economy, and population, suggesting that the conquerors ruled through systems already developed by the English kingdom. Scholars from Stanford, Oxford, and major archaeological projects continue to weigh rupture against continuity. Was 1066 an ending, or a violent reordering of what already existed? Perhaps the answer is hidden in the word forever. Forever does not always mean everything changes at once. Sometimes it means a change enters deeply enough that every later age must pass through it. The conquest did not make England entirely Norman. It did not make England entirely French. It did not destroy English speech, law, or memory. Instead, it forced them through pressure, humiliation, adaptation, and survival until something new emerged. That New England was not cleanly born. It was made from seized estates, rebuilt churches, royal surveys, guarded roads, mixed language, arranged marriages, famine memories, court disputes, and children raised in the shadow of towers. It was made from conquest and endurance together. The Norman elite needed the land, the labour, the records, the towns, and the people they had subdued. The English beneath them needed ways to live without surrendering everything that made the world recognisable. You stand at twilight between castle and village. The castle wall is dark above you. The village lamps are small below it. From one direction comes the sound of a horse being led into a stable. From another comes the low voice of a mother singing to a child. The two sounds belong to the same country now, though not equally. That is the uneasy truth. England after conquest is not only ruled, it is layered, divided, and slowly blending. A mainstream fact stands firmly at the centre. The ruling class of England became overwhelmingly Norman and continental in origin, while the broader population remained largely English. Over generations, these worlds merged unevenly, producing a kingdom whose later identity drew from both domination and survival. Major studies of medieval England have shown that the effects of 1066 reached into law, language, aristocracy, architecture, religion, and royal power for centuries. The darkness of the conquest lies not only in death, it lies in transformation without consent. It lies in waking to find that your lord is gone. Your court sounds different. Your land belongs upward to someone else. Your church has new masters, and your child must learn a world you did not choose. It lies in the ability of violence to become normal life if it lasts long enough. A tower becomes scenery, a foreign name becomes noble, a confiscation becomes inheritance, a wound becomes tradition. Still, human beings are difficult to finish. They adapt without always forgiving. They remember without always speaking. They borrow words from rulers and turn those words into their own. They pray in rebuilt churches and bury their dead beneath altered stones. They work fields whose ownership has changed, and somehow the seed still grows. They carry Old England forward inside New England, not whole, not untouched, but not extinguished. The road grows darker now. The castle fades into one shape with the hill. The church bell sounds once, then again, its tone spreading across fields where generations will live without knowing every cost beneath their feet. The conquest has become history, but history has not become harmless. It remains under the language, under the law, under the stones, under the map. And perhaps that is why 1066 still troubles the mind. Not because one battle changed everything in a single afternoon, though that afternoon mattered terribly. Not because one duke became king, though that crown altered centuries. It troubles us because it shows how a society can survive a catastrophe and still be permanently rearranged by it. It shows that the past is not dead ground. It is pressure beneath the present. Let the road soften now. Let the cold field fade into shadow, and let the hard outlines of towers grow less sharp against the sky. The horses have gone quiet in their stalls. The scribes have set down their pens. The last smoke from the village hearth lifts gently into the night, carrying the scent of ash, bread, wool, and rain. You do not need to solve the whole mystery tonight. Some histories are not doors to be closed. They are rooms where the lamp is lowered slowly, and the shapes remain half seen. The old kingdom is gone, but not entirely. The new kingdom has risen, but not cleanly. Between them lies England, wounded and breathing, changed by iron, parchment, prayer, and hunger. Perhaps every country is like this when looked at closely. A place made from victories, griefs, accidents, compromises, and voices that were almost lost. A place where the powerful carve their names in stone, while ordinary people leave warmth in the walls. A place where conquest claims to finish the story, but memory refuses to be so obedient. So rest now with that softer thought. The fields are dark, the road is empty, the bell has faded. Somewhere beyond the ridge, dawn will come again, touching the grass without choosing sides. It will shine on castle stones, church roofs, ploughland, river mist, and the quiet tracks of people who kept walking. And perhaps, beneath all that remains visible, the older voices are still there, low as embers, waiting in the earth, reminding the sleeping island that no conquest ever owns the whole of memory. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. End of script. Good night.